So today's daf yomi is really daf vav of Nedarim, but we're going to start on the Dalet on the B's, on 4b on the bottom, around 10 lines from the bottom, where the Mishnah had said if somebody says to their friend, Mudarani mimcha, or Mufushani mimcha, or Muruchutani mimcha, that is us, or that is prohibited. That and if they say Shani ochel Shani tom Hareza Aser. So we're on the bottom of 4b, around 10 lines from the bottom. So that's the statement of our Mishnah. In that context, Shmuel comes along and Amar Shmuel Bakulan Ad Sheyomer Shani Ochelcha Shani Toemucha. So Shmuel says in all of these cases, that we're going to say that with all three of these expressions, Mudranim Mimcha, Mefrashim Mimcha, Merchukaim Mimcha, the nader doesn't apply, the vow doesn't apply until he adds these words and all these things that I will eat from you or I'll be prohibited from you. He needs to add these words in order for it to be applicable. But if he doesn't say those words, then this shortened statement, this handle, so to speak, will not be applicable. So the Gemara challenges this statement of Shmuel that you need to add Shani Ochelcha or Shani Toamucha from a Brisa. The Brisa says Mudarani Mimcha. Meisvei, the Brisa says Mudarani Mimcha, Mefrishani Mimcha, Merchukai Mimcha, Areza Aser. That even if you just say Mudarani Mimcha, Mefrishani Mimcha, Merchukai Mimcha, it's prohibited. You don't need to say all at once. And so too, Shani Ochelcha, Shani Toamucha, Hareza Aser. Means to say you don't need to say the full expression in order for it to be prohibited. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a question on Shmuel. The Gemara says, no, what does that price mean? That's referring to actually where you also said Shani Ochelcha, Shani Toamucha. Gemara says it can't be. Vatanya Ipcha, we have a price that says the opposite. Shani Ochelcha, Shani Toamucha, Aser. We have explicit price that says it the opposite way, that even if you just say Shani Ochel Shani Toem, it's prohibited, and also if you just say Mudrani Mimcham for Shani Mimcham Chaminka Reza Aser. The Gemara says no. The way you read that price is also Tani Acha Ukvar Amar Mudrani. That where you said this, but you've already said this phrase of Mudrani Mimcha. When do we say it's prohibited? If you say Ashani Ochelcha, well, you've already said Mudrani Mimcha. Gemara says Yachi Hanu Reisha. First of all, then what's the difference between the first price and the second price? And furthermore, Va'od Aser Lamali. Why does it have to put the phrase Aser in between? It seems a very strange brisa. So therefore, the Gemara says, okay, well, let's re-understand what Shmuel actually taught. This is what Shmuel taught. Oh, Amar Shmuel. So Shmuel taught, what is our Mishnah teaching us? When it says Mujani Mimcha, he's prohibited, but his friend is permitted. What does that mean? So what does that mean if you say Mujani Mimcha? So what it means is if you say Mudrani Mimcha, it means only he's prohibited, but his friend is permitted. That's what Shmuel was saying. Amar Shmuel Taima, that what's the reason? That's the case. And so therefore, if he says Shani Ochelcha, Shani Toamucha, then we're going to say, in addition to him saying Mudrani Mimcha, then we're going to say Hudas, or he's prohibited, and Chaveiro Motor, but his friend is permitted to have benefit from him. He's prohibited to have benefit from his friend, but his friend will be permitted to have benefit from him because he uses the expression Shani Ochel Lecha. So therefore, he's prohibited, but his friend is permitted. Aval Mudrani on top of Hayamad Aleph. Aval Amar Hudrani Emeich Hudei. But if he says an expression of Mudrani Emeich, and the Ran explains that implies Mudar ani v'nechasim imchech u'minechasech, that under those expressions is going to mean that both of them are prohibited from each other. Ki adu amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Mudrani eimech. If he says the expression of Mudrani eimech shnei and asurin, then both are prohibited. So then the Gemara says Tanan, and the Gemara says in those circumstances, Gemara challenges this law of Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. The Gemara challenges this law of Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina that he says Mudrani Eimech, both of them are prohibited. Because we learned in the Mishnah, Hareini Alecha Cherem, if a person says, behold, I am a cherem upon you, meaning to say that all the benefit that comes from me should be prohibited upon you, like cherim, like temple property, amudar aser, then we're going to say that the one who is vowed upon, not the one who makes the vow, the one who was vowed upon, he's prohibited of a madi or low, but the one who makes the vow is not going to be prohibited. And if it's like Rabbi Yossi and Chanina, that if you say mudrani hemech, both of them are prohibited. So therefore, why wouldn't we say in this case also areni alecha cherem that they're both prohibited? So the Gemara says could go into Parish. No, the reason why they're not prohibited is because he says there va'at alaylo. In that expression, he says, "But you are not prohibited upon me." He literally says that areni alecha cherem, but you are not prohibited on me. But if he would really say areni alecha cherem, both of them would be prohibited. So the Gemara says, but don't we say from the following Mishnah, at alai cherem, that if you say anything that comes from you is a cherem upon me, I know there asa, aval mudar lo. But then under those circumstances, the one who makes the vow, but the one who is vowed upon, is not going to be prohibited. And if you follow Rabbi Yossi or Chanina's position, then we would say that both of them were prohibited. The Gemara says could go into Parish. No, under those circumstances, va'ana alecho. He specifies that I'm not going to be prohibited upon you. So the Gemara says I can't be, because that would imply of ostama mai. If both of them, we made just a blank vow, what would we say? Shneim asurim, that both of them are prohibited. Diktani seifa, but it can't be, because we learned from the concluding clause of the Mishnah, areni alecha va'at alai, because the next clause of the Mishnah says that if I take a vow upon you and you upon me, shneim asurim, which implies hadein hu dishnein asurim. In that case, where he says nothing, both of them are prohibited. Hastama, but in that case, where he specifies that both of them are prohibited. Hastama, but where it's just baseline, and he just says atalei cherem, and he doesn't say ani alecha lo, but ani alecha hu asar v'chaver motor, and he is going to be prohibited, and his friend and the other person will be permitted. So therefore, the Gemara says we have to say, let's redefine what Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says. Ela hachi etmar. The Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. This is what Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina said. Mudar ani lecha shneim asurim. If he says I am vowed upon you, both of them are prohibited, because the expression of lecha implies has two implications. You, meaning to say what I'm vowing upon you, and also from you. But mudrani eimech, but if he uses that expression and the word eimech means only from you, hu asar v'chaveru mutter, that he himself will be prohibited, but the other person who he vowed against will be permitted. Gemara says it can't be. Ramas nisin the katani eimech, and our Mishnah says mudrani eimech. Ukimnu Ramas nisin l'shmuel and biku, and then Shmuel said that applies to both of them. Achi Omar. And Shmuel, and that's only Achi Yomer Shani Toim Shani Ochel Uda Chaver Mutter. When we said that Shmuel says only when he says Ani Ochel Ani Toim but Mudrani Emech, but the word Emech by itself would mean Shnei and Asurin would also mean that both are prohibited, and that's not what's implied from our Mishnah, which implies that if you just say without Shani Ochelcha, Shneim Asurim, so what does Shmuel's law mean? So therefore, we have to reanalyze what Shmuel's saying. El Mikara de Shmuel Achim Itmar. So first, this is what Shmuel taught. So this is what Shmuel said. The Amar Shani Ochelcha v'Shani Toim Ocha. If he uses that expression that I eat from you, that I taste from you, we're going to say that under those, in addition to Mudranim, we're going to say who the aim, who asur elabachila, he which in general he's only prohibited to eat from the food of his friend and from the other benefits. If he says shani ochelcha, it means he's only prohibited to eat from his friend. Mudranim imcha asur afilu ba'ana. But if he just says the word Mudranim imcha without adding on the words shani ochelcha, then he's going to be prohibited even in benefit. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, then I'll tell you what Shmuel should have said. And Shmuel should have said the following. V'imlo amar shani ochelcha v'shani to'amucha. But if he didn't say shani ochelcha, shani to'amucha, then asur afilu ba'anah. Because then what Shmuel is saying, if he didn't say shani ochel or shani to'amucha, then he's prohibited even to have any benefit. But by adding the word shani ochelcha, he's saying he's only prohibited to have food. The Gemara says, so this is what Shmuel says. Taima de Amar Shani Ochocha Shani Tomocha Huda Aser. Which Shmuel is saying, if he says Shani Ochocha Shani Tomocha Huda Aser, because he adds those words, we're going to say he's prohibited. Aval Amar Mudrani Emeich. But if he says the word Mudrani Emeich without saying Shani Ochocha Lo Mashma the Amar Aser, then it doesn't imply that he says anything is prohibited. If he just says the words, Mudrani Emeich, it's not a indicative yad that everything is prohibited. My timer, mudar ani mimcha, because now what Shmuel is saying, if he just uses the words mudar ani mimcha, lo mishtamei, lo mishta'ina ba'adach mashma, that it doesn't mean it's not indicative of what he's saying, because it can be explained. It can mean I'm not going to speak to you, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to have any benefit from you, and so therefore. It doesn't mean anything. If you just say the words mudar ani mimcha, if you say chani ochocha, then it means you can't eat from him. But if you just say mudrani mimcha, it doesn't mean anything. Mufreshani mimcha, duavina imach, ma'asa matan. If you say the words mufreshani mimcha, it can mean I'm not going to do business with you. And meruchakani mimcha, delo kamina ba'arba amos tilach ma'ashma. And if you just say meruchani mimcha, it doesn't mean I'm vowing from you. It could just mean I'm not going to be within your 4 cubits. And so therefore, what Shmuel is saying, that what's the reason why Mudrani Mimcha is prohibited? Only because you also say Shani Ochelcha. But otherwise, those expressions do not imply something that's prohibited. So the Gemara says, so you mean to say, Leima Kasavar Shmuel, Yadayim She'em Mochichos or having Yadayim. So it must be Shmuel's other position that if you do a Yad, which is a handle, which is a abbreviated version of a vow, Shmuel saying that it's not considered a vow. Lo having Yadayim. The Yad it has to only be interpreted in the way in which you intended. But if we could have more than one interpretation, we wouldn't be saying that. Meaning to say, the Gemara is now unsure. How do we explain what Shmuel's position is? Does Shmuel have the position that a yad that's einon mochichos is not considered a yadayim? Or maybe he's saying, is that what he's saying? So the Gemara says, that is what Shmuel is saying. Shmuel mukim l'alamas nisan Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel is saying that our Mishnah follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Yadayim she'em mochichos l'hav Yadayim. That it's a yad that's not indicative. It's then it's not going to be considered a yad. Meaning to say that since our Mishnah is clear to him that follows this position of Rabbi Yehuda, so we say therefore that a yad she'em mochichos l'hav Yadayim. So the Gemara says, well, how do we know that that's Rabbi Yehuda's position? And the Gemara says, we're going to learn it right now. It's not, because we learned in the Mishnah in Gittin 85a. Gufo shall get, what is the main form of a get? Hareya mutar sukaladim. The person says, in the get, you have to write, you are permitted to every man. Because then he's basically cutting himself off from her, and she's permitted to every man. But Rabbi Yehuda says that's not enough. It's not enough just to say Harayat Mutar Kol Adam. But you also have to say Rabbi Yehuda Omer V'dein di'avi leichin unai sefer teruchin ve'ger shivukin. And this scroll that I'm giving to you is going to be for me a bill of divorce and a letter that I am leaving from you. So we see from here that Harei Mutaras Kol Adam is not sufficient according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it means maybe he was just divorcing her with his words. He was not actually divorcing her. And so therefore it's not sufficient. So we see from here that the concept of a Yadayim She'em Mochichos of a Yadayim, that goes according to the position of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, why? Ema Dachak Shmuel Masnisik Rabbi Yehuda. Why is the Mishnah forced? Why is Shmuel forced to Mishnah? We're in the Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda, who's an individual position, and so therefore, for that reason, he's saying that the vow is not going to apply if somebody just says Mudrani Mimcha without saying Shani Ochocha. Why don't we say that the Mishnah follows the Rabbanan? Afagav the Ein Yadayim Mochichos, and we say that even though his statement is not indicative, nevertheless, it would still be applicable. And so therefore, by Mudrani Mimcha, it would also be enough to say that they're prohibited. Amarava. So why is Shmuel forced to say the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda? Because he's saying, Masnisan Kashite. The Mishnah was very difficult for Shmuel. What was difficult about the Mishnah for Shmuel? Am I Tani? Because what does our Mishnah say? Shani ochelcha, shani toemucha. Why does our Mishnah say that expression? Shani ochelcha, shani toemucha. It could just say, "Listen, shani ochel, shani toem." It could have just said the words that I eat and that I taste without adding in the word lecha. Because since it's clear that according to Shmuel that the words mudrani memcha and shani ochelcha are two parts of one vow, he could have just said shani ochel without saying lecha, because he already said mudrani memcha. So why does he have to add the word shani ochelcha? Shema mina, but yadayim ochelcha. So we see from our Mishnah Shmuel saying we need the yadayim to be completely clear. So the Gemara says, Idmar, so we're going to have a machukas amarayim whether or not the yadayim need to be completely clear, whether these handles need to be completely clear in order for them to be applicable. Idmar yadayim she'em ochlichos. So if we have these yadayim that are not clear, Abaye says Havyan yadayim, the Rava says Havyan yadayim. Abaye says that they are considered vows, like the Chachamim, and Rava says they're not yadayim, like Shmuel's interpreting our Mishnah. Amar Rava, Rabbi Idi Asbori. So Rava says, Rabbi Idi explained to me the source of this principle, that they are not vows. What's the source? Amar Kra, it says in the verse about a vow, Nazir la Hashem, that it says that you take a vow to God, and the word Nazir la Azir. And we learned in the Brisa that from the expert word of Lazir, we learned that the handle of a Nazir is like a Nazirite. And it's the same thing for the handle of a vow is like a vow. Ma'akish yados naziros and naziros. We compare a handle of a Nazirite's vow to a Nazirite. Ma naziros b'afra. Just like the naziros needs to be stated clearly, it needs to be explicit. So too, af yados naziros b'afra. Also, the handle of the Nazirite needs to be b'afra. It needs to be clearly. So the Gemara says, let's say that this dispute, let's say that this dispute between Abaye and Rava is the exact same dispute as between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan that we were discussing. The Rabbi Yehuda says that if it's a yad she'em mochiach, it's not a vow, and the Chum say it is. Maybe this vow, basically, that the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim by Gitin is the same vow, is the same dispute by vows in general. And so therefore we would say that the way Shmuel sees our Mishnah as a dispute between the Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda is also the same way that Abaye and Rava are seeing our Mishnah. Because we learned Gufo shall get, as we say, what is the essential part of the get? Arayat mutar sakol. And the Chachamim say from the Mishnah in Gittin, all you need to say is you're permitted to every man, and that's technically speaking a get. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, that you need to add in all this precise language. You're being divorced with this bill of this document. Let's just say that Abaye is following the Rabbanan. The Rava the Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Abaye is following the Rabbanan, and Rava says like Rabbi Yehuda. So maybe that's what we'll say, that Abaye is following the Rabbanan. If it's a yad she'em mochiach, it's not a. If it's a yad she'em mochiach, it's still a yad. Whereas Rava says like Rabbi Yehuda, that it is not a vow. Amracha Abaye would say no. Ana da Amri, I feel Rabbi Yehuda. I could say that by Gittin, even by Gittin, I follow Rabbi Yehuda that it's not a get. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda, but by Gittin it's not a get. But by a vow, it would be a valid vow. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yehuda. But when does Rabbi Yehuda say by Gittin we don't need a get? Yadayim mochichos. When does Rabbi Yehuda say that we need a yad that's explicit? Gabe get, by a divorce. Tibayin and krisos, because it needs to be a completely valid divorce. It needs to be completely separated. Krisos, you need to be cut off. Veleka, and without these explicit terminology, it's not sufficient. Avoba, but in general, mishamasle. How do we know by a neder in general that Rabbi Yehuda requires that? The Rava says, Hani da Amri. Rava says, I'll say my position. that a yad she'ein mochiach is not a yad, afilu rabbanan. And I'll say that follows even the position of the rabbanan. Not like Shmuel says some dispute, not like we said, Shmuel says dispute between our Mishnah is really a dispute between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, and our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda, but I would say that a yad that's not mochiach is not a yad, is even according to the rabbanan. How so? I can't welcome a rabbanan do bayina yadayim mochichos elagabe get dein adam negarish hs chavero. When do the Chacham say you don't need an explicit handle in order to be applicable by a divorce? Because a person is not going to be divorcing his friend's wife, meaning to say it doesn't need to be explicit, and it's obvious without saying the word minai that he's being divorced from him. But in general, the yad would need to be explicit. So the Gemara challenges Abaye's position. That Abaye says that there's no Tana who says yadayim she'ein mochichos or avi yadayim. That even Rabbi Yehuda says that if it's a handle that it's not explicit, it's still a yad, it's still a vow. Meisvei, we challenge this from the following brisa. Let's say, for example, to be a loaf of bread that was placed in front of somebody, and he looks at this bread and he says, "Harei hu alai, harei ze alai, aser." If he says this bread is upon me, then he's going, or this, or it is upon me, he's going to say it's prohibited as a vow. Who yadal carbon, because this formula is a handle for a carbon. Because when somebody brings a carbon and he says the word yad, it implies that it's prohibited to him. And so too, as a korban, so too if he just says about this bread, it's going to be prohibited to him as a handle. The only reason why the yad is going to be effective there is because he uses the word alai upon me. Well, but if he didn't say this word upon me, it's not going to be an effective yad. And so therefore we see that the yad needs to be explicit. So tiyufta de Abaye. So therefore it's a refutation of Abaye who says that even Rabbi Yehuda would require the yad to be this would be a refutation of Abaye who said that there's no Tana who says the yad she'ein mochiach is not a yad, because we see from here that according to this, so we see from here that a yad that's not mochiach is not a yad, and so therefore this follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and Abaye said there's no such position. So tiyufta de Abaye. So Amar alcha Abaye. So Gemara said no. Abaye would say Taima to Amar. What's the reason why we say that according to this shita, if he says according to this shita, if he says that the only reason why the bread is prohibited upon him is because it says alai, but otherwise it wouldn't be prohibited. What's the reason? The reason is Taima Amar alai hu da asar. The reason he says upon me is prohibited. Avo Amar Harehu, Amar alai. But if he just said Harehu and he didn't say upon me, we're going to say Harehu de Hefker. Then it's possible that it could be Hefker, or Harehu de Tzedakah, or he could be saying it's for charity. And so since it's not explicit, so therefore then it wouldn't mean anything. But Stam Yadayim, but a regular yad that's not mochiach, meaning to say that you can learn either way, we're going to say it would be a yad, like Abaye says. The Gemara says, the Gemara says that can't be, because it says the only reason why it works here is because it says it's a yad for a vow. And so we see from here that somebody who says this vow, under those circumstances, we see that somebody who says this vow under those circumstances is like a vow to bring a korban. And so therefore, by him prohibiting this loaf of bread with those expressions, he's saying that this loaf of bread is like a sacrifice, and it's basically applicable. And so therefore, the Gemara is saying, since we were saying that that's the case, we can't say that the reference is from the word alai, that it means hareu hefker, because the vow is saying hareu korban. that this is a yad for a carbon, and so therefore, even though it says alai, the word alai doesn't mean the yad because he's saying it's like a carbon, and so therefore, when you do a carbon, he's not using the word alai at all, and so therefore, the Bryce is only saying it in order to tell us that a reyu is a yad that is mochiach, and without that, it wouldn't apply at all. And so we see from here, says the Gemara, that a yad, it's not mochiach, is not a yad. And that is not like Abaye, but that's like Rabbi Yehuda who says the yad, that's not mochiach, it's not a yad. So the Gemara says, Ela ema. So we're going to say, Taima de Amar, that what's the reasoning? Because he says a lie, that's the reason why who's aser, the chaver mutter. But if he says harehu, shnei asurin, if he just says, so this is what Abaye is saying. We're saying since he says a lie, that's why he's prohibited and his friend is permitted. But if he just says Sarehu, then both of them would be prohibited. And so therefore, the Dilma Areu Hakdish Kamer. So therefore, Abaye is saying that even according to this position, a yad that's not mochiach is a yad. So the Gemara says, let's challenge Abaye from the following brisa. Meisvei Arezu Chatas Areu Ze Asham. If he says this is a Chatas or this is an Asham, Avbu Yishu Chayav Chatas the Asham. Even though he's liable for a chatas and an asham, the animal is not going to be considered sacred and it remains chuan because the chatas and the asham don't come as a voluntary offering. They only come to if a person is obligated in it. And so when he says arezu chatas, even though he's liable for a chatas, it doesn't imply that he sanctifies this animal. But if he says arezu chatasi, arezu ashami, this is my chatas, this is my asham, if he was obligated in this sacrifice, then it is a valid vow. And so we see tiyufta d'Abaye. This is a refutation of Abaye. Why? Because if it's like Abaye, the yad that's not mochiach is a yad, then why do we say in the first clause, if he was mechuyev chatas, and he says arezu chatas, he said nothing. Because a yad, because from the law of a yad, we have to say it as though he said arezu chatasi. So if Abaye is saying that a yad that's not mochiach is a yad, arezu chatas should be like arezu chatasi. So Amacha Abaye, Amani Rabbi Yehuda. So he says Abaye would say that brisa follows Rabbi Yehuda, who says that a yad that's not mochiach is not a yad. But Rabbi Yehuda says I pass like the Chamim, and our Mishnah is like the Chamim. More says, but didn't Abaye says I could say my position even according to Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda says a yad that's not mochiach, that I would say that it still is a yad. So the Gemara says Hadarbe, he reversed himself. So the Gemara says Ella Lema, fine. So if we see that Abaye has reversed himself and says that a yad that's not mochiach, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to say is not a yad, and not like Rabbi tries to say that Rabbi Yehuda says like the Chamim. Well, maybe we'll say that maybe also Rava also reversed himself. Maybe Rava would try to say, Rava Damar Rabbi Yehuda. Do you want to say that Rava? Maybe we want to change how we interpreted Rava's position, and so maybe we want to say that according to Rava, that it is a machlokes Tanaim, and that this position of Yad Shalom Mochiach is only according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rava, because Rava said, Rava had said, I say that the Rabbanon could even say, like I said, Rabbi Yehuda is that a yad that's adkan, that a yad that's not mochiach is not have a yad. Adkan will come here, Rabbanon, when did the Rava say that the Rabbanon don't require a yad to be explicit by a get? Because the Ein Adam Megarish as Eshus Chavero, because a person doesn't divorce his friend's wife, meaning to say you don't need to be as clear there. But in general, he would require Yadayim to be Mochichos. So therefore, that's what Rava was saying. So Gemara says, therefore the Gemara is basically saying we don't need to say that in general. We don't need to say in general that Rava says that there's a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about Nedarim in general. It's just by Gitin there's going to be a dispute between them. So by Rav Papa, so now Rav Papa asked the following question: Yesh Yadul Kiddushin Olo. Do we say that there's an abbreviated version by Kiddushin or not? We say that this abbreviated version, which the Chachamim say is, or according to Rava both, do we say that there's a Yadul Kiddushin, and even a short version of the betrothal is valid, or do we not say this? So the Gemara says, "Hey Chidami, what's the scenario which we're talking about?" That Rav Papa is unsure. If it's where a man says to a woman, he says, "You're betrothed to me," and he says to her friend, and you also. Pshita, it's obvious that the second one is betrothed because Hainu Kiddushin Atzman. This is an expression of betrothal explicitly, and it's not a handle for Kiddushin. Because there's obviously that's the case. Where he says to the woman, you're betrothed to me. And he says to a friend, V'at. He doesn't say V'at Nami, he just says, and you. At Nami, is he really saying you also are betrothed to me? And then a friend is also betrothed. Odilma V'at Chazai, or maybe he's saying to her, and I want you to see this. I want you to see how I betrothed her. And therefore it's not a valid betrothal. So the Gemara says, is really Rav Papa questioning this question whether there's yad for Kiddushin or not. But isn't Rav Papa explicit in Maseches Kiddushin that he does say that there's a yad for Kiddushin and there's no concern? And he shouldn't have asked this question because Shmuel says there, if a person gives to a woman money and he says, Arayat Mekudeshes, she's betrothed. And Rav Papa had interpreted in the Gemara in Kiddushin Ayam Beis that if he doesn't say the word li, by not saying the word li, it's a yad that's not mochiach. And we see from here that, and so Rav Papa had asked the Bai there, does Shmuel say Yadayim Shem Mochichos Hava Yadayim? And so we see that with respect to Kiddushin, he says it is a yad, but with respect to Nazir, he says it's not a yad. Gemara says, does Shmuel say a Yadayim Shein Mochichos is a yad? We see, and so we see from here, Mikal Desfirwe, or Papa Diyesh Yad Kiddushin. He's only asking about a yad that's not mochiach, but in general, he does say that there is yad for Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Chada migom mai Desfirwe Shmuel Amalei Abaye. No, what Rav Papa was questioning Abaye from the contradiction in Shmuel's words himself. And so, but we don't know what he himself says. He was just basically asking about an internal contradiction from Shmuel's words himself. But we don't know what he himself would say about such a position. So now the Gemara says, by Rav Papa, yesh yad l'peya or ein yad l'peya. So this goes to the law of a pay, of a corner of a field that you're supposed to leave over for the poor person. So technically speaking, there's no limit about how much you have to give, but the Chachamim gave a position that it can't be less than 1/60th. So Rav Papa asked the question, is there's a yad for a corner of a field or not? So the Gemara says, what's the question? What's the question? If he says this row of vegetables will be for the corner, and then he says, and this one also, that's a whole corner that he's left over. No, what's this question about? He says this row of vegetables is peya, and this, and he doesn't say in this one also. Miklal, so we see from here, the Gemara interrupts the question. Miklal, the chiyamar sada kuat peya. He means if he says the whole field is a corner, it's a corner of a field. Is that what he says? Yes. Vatanya, like we learned to the price. So it's kol sadeo peya. Ose, he can make his whole field a corner. Tamalomar peyas sadecha. So therefore, you could make your whole corner of your field over for the mitzvah of peya. So the Gemara says, "Mi amrin kivin iskash lekarbanos." Do we want to say that since the corner of a field is compared to a sacrifice, ma karbanos yeshlam yad af peya yeshlam vayad odoma ki iskash lebal ta'acher ode iskash, or maybe it's compared only to bal ta'acher, but not to other areas, only to the prohibition of do not delay the vow. So we're going to take up this question and continue it, God willing, God willing, tonight. We also have the daf yomi at 8, but we have davening shachris in 5 minutes. I'll go upstairs now. All right, shkoyach. I'll restart the Zoom in 5 minutes.